All right, guys. Well, it looks like we have had another snow day, so I hope you're really enjoying all of this. And because of that, I'm going to push ahead with the second part of section five, which is the legacy of Alexander the Great. So you learned about his conquests in the previous flip, and now we're going to learn about his legacy. A big major idea of the legacy of Alexander the Great, and probably why, more importantly, we call him the Great. I mean, yeah, his military accomplishments were unbelievable by the age of 32 when he dies, but really his true greatness comes in simply the fact that he spreads Greek culture all across the Eastern Mediterranean, and in doing so will also affect the Western Mediterranean with the rise of Rome and their emulation of the Greeks and the empires of Alexander that get set up in the wake of his death. So we want to talk most importantly, when we think about the Alexander the Great legacy, is an idea we call Hellenization. Now, the Greek word for their land is Hellas. Thus, the word Hellenization simply means to make Greek. And it's the fact that as Alexander the Great conquers areas, a bunch of Greek speaking peoples come in his wake and settle, and they bring their architecture, and they bring their arts, and they bring their literature, and they bring their language, and they bring all those things we talked about in the section on Greek culture. And they're going to bring all these things all across the empire of Alexander the Great. And even after his empire is divided between his generals, this Greekness becomes the foundational idea of Western civilization. But he's going to bring another aspect to this as well. When Alexander conquers people, he also brings a form of, we kind of saw it with the Persians, a form of tolerance in which he demands that his men kind of wear the clothes of the people they've conquered. They're deferential to their customs and their religion. So we're not only going to get Hellenization, we're going to get an idea we call assimilation, which means to kind of follow the local customs. And what this is going to bring about is this kind of blend of Greek and non-Greek ideas. And really, this is going to kind of form the patchwork that makes up our own ideologies in the West today at a basic level. This kind of blending of all that great cultural glory that was Greece with more of those Eastern ideas we've dealt with earlier in the year. He's also going to found many new cities, as we see, and he names most of them after himself, whether they be called Alexandria or Alexandropolis. As we remember, though, he does name one after his beloved horse Bucephalus. And you're going to get this kind of blending of the Western Greek and the Eastern Persian, Egyptian cultures, and that's going to be really foundational to Western civilization. At the same time, as well, the most important city he's going to found is not going to be in Greece. It's not going to be in Persia. It's actually going to be in Egypt. He's going to found a great cultural center of the Western world on the banks of the Mediterranean in Egypt. He's going to found a city called Alexandria. Now, again, as you see in the map in your book, as you read, there's many different Alexandrias, but it's the one in Egypt that becomes this like foundational cultural center and will kind of eclipse Athens as the great cultural center of the Western world until really the rise of Rome. And even with the rise of Rome, Alexandria will still be an extremely, extremely important city as far as education, culture, learning, etc. In this city, we're going to have one of the greatest libraries in the world at this point built. We're also going to have one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, a giant lighthouse we call the Pharos, which could be seen for miles out into the Mediterranean, guiding all these merchant ships and whatnot into the harbor of Alexandria. Unfortunately, it crumbles and falls, and we don't really know where it is today. People still search for it, and we'll see the Library of Alexandria, the Great Library, will be burned down during the time of Julius Caesar. But think of Alexandria, Egypt, in the wake of Alexander the Great's death as becoming this just great cultural epicenter of the Western world, where all the great ideas of East and West are going to kind of blend in and be made into this great center for learning. And that will be under the Ptolemaic dynasty. His general Ptolemy will run this area, and you don't really know too much about that, but we'll hear a lot about this when we get to the age of Cleopatra during the Roman later part of the Roman Republic. She's actually Greek, not Egyptian. And we'll hear from Alexandria, the city, again. Another big idea with Alexander himself, and this would be prevalent, is the idea that women should be educated and have a place in society. We can probably attest this to his mother, Olympias, being so instrumental in his rising to the throne of Macedon. So that's another big thing that's going to be kind of more of a Western idea that starts to develop, and it'll wax and wane over time. But really, Alexander pushes this idea that women should be respected and, even most importantly, educated. So let's just talk about very quickly, after we look at a few of these pictures, kind of some of the great thinkers whose ideas become spread across the Western world during the time of Alexander. First off, this right here is an artist representation of the Pharos, giant lighthouse. Here we see just a city plan of ancient Alexandria. You can look over here and see kind of what that's all about. And here's the sarcophagus of Alexander. He's actually buried in Alexandria, but eventually his body disappears. We're not so sure where it ended up, but it was for a time in Alexandria, Egypt, which would have been one of his favorite cities that he founded. So let's look at some Hellenistic civilization thinkers, and really look at kind of the influence they had. Now, a lot of these thinkers were alive. I shouldn't say probably. They were alive during the time before Alexander the Great, but these ideas become spread all around the empire during his conquest and even after his conquest and his death, and they become kind of foundational ideas of the ancient world in the West, though they will eventually be lost after the fall of Rome, as we'll see. One of the most important philosophers in the Hellenistic world is Zeno. And Zeno is going to found a philosophy called Stoicism. In a basic way, Stoicism is basically the idea that you need to accept life by focusing on what you can control and don't worry about what you can't control. And the biggest thing you can control is how you treat others and being good to others, being charitable to others, and really understanding that you just focus on you and you focus on not worrying too much. Don't sweat the small stuff. Worry about how you treat people and how you act. And nowadays it becomes, we say you're stoic, you have no emotion. Kind of like that in a way, I guess. Like, don't get too high, too low over anything that you can't control. But it's actually going to be foundationally Christian, like where the peoples are really going to like Stoicism because of the idea of like the treatment of others and serving others, and that's what you can control. So Stoicism became really important in Rome and also very important in Christianity. So Zeno's an important philosopher. For those of you who want to jam a pencil in your eye during math class, you have nobody to thank but Euclid. Euclid is a Hellenistic thinker who's going to write a book called The Elements, and it's our first great work focusing on the ideas of modern geometry and the laws of geometry, proofs, all those fun things you guys can all thank Euclid for. Also, we're going to get a great thinker named Pythagoras, and Pythagoras is going to develop basically a theory that allows you to calculate the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So Pythagoras is really important for that. And again, like I said, a lot of these guys are living before Alexander, but their ideas are being spread because of his conquest. Also, we're going to get another thinker named Aristarchus. And Aristarchus is going to discover that the world revolves on an axis around the sun, not the sun revolving around the earth. So we're going to call this the heliocentric view of the universe, which is the true view of the universe, that you have the sun in the middle and the earth revolves around it, as opposed to having the earth in the middle with the sun revolving around it. So this heliocentric view is really important, and it's actually the real view. It's what really happens. Unfortunately, though, this will be lost at the fall of the Roman Empire, and it will take a long time with Galileo and whatnot of the Renaissance until we start to re-believe in this heliocentric view. But this guy Aristarchus was thinking this up thousands of years before Galileo or Copernicus ever thought about it. Another great thinker is Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes is going to discover that the Earth is round, and he's actually going to figure out its circumference, pi r squared, its circumference of the Earth. And again, it's not Columbus who discovers the Earth is round. Great thinkers thousands of years before had thought of these things. It's just in Western Europe with the fall of Rome, we're going to forget a lot of this stuff. But it's pretty important to see that Hellenistic civilization is quite advanced. And another important aspect in your life today would be the use of simple machines and things like that. So we're going to get actually a later Hellenistic thinker after Alexander, whose name is Archimedes. He's going to invent a lot of simple machines, such as the lever and the pulley, that are going to help make war machines, but also help build larger buildings. And Archimedes is going to have the famous quote that if you give him a lever long enough, he can move the entire world. So next time you're in physics class, Archimedes, one of the great physical scientists in world history. So he does a lot of stuff like that. And finally, and this is a little before Alexander, but medicine is going to really, really, really move forward during the Hellenistic period. And one of the most famous people who are going to study medicine at this point is Hippocrates. And the big thing he's going to give to us, which doctors still do today, is an oath that when you become a doctor, you promise to do no harm to your patients. Because even before this, people who you consider like people who made medicine and stuff would be making poisons and things like that. Hippocrates is going to say that's wrong. If you're going to learn the art of healing people, that's all you should be doing. You shouldn't use your doctor skills for evil. And today, anybody who's going to be a medical doctor still takes what's called the Hippocratic Oath. And that's just something you take to kind of say that I'm going to be a very moral doctor. I'm going to help my patients, not harm my patients. So all these things are things we kind of take for granted today, but they all have their origins either kind of before, during, or after the life of Alexander, during this time period we call the Hellenistic Age. And it will have profound effects on the Romans after them, who will take a lot of these ideas and kind of advance them even more. But then Rome's going to fall, and the West is kind of going to forget a lot of these things, whereas at least in the East, a lot of these ideas will be preserved until we can get to the Renaissance a couple thousand years after this. So that's about it for the Hellenistic Age. Make sure you know your thinkers. Make sure you understand Hellenism, assimilation. Those are all big ideas and big words you have to know. I hope you have enjoyed your couple days off. And overall, I hope it was a really good time. But when you get back to school, we're ready to roll. We're moving towards the midterm. It's coming quicker than you think. So also make sure you're working on your study guides. Make sure if you have any questions, you're making sure you have those ready for next week. You're studying your maps. Lots to do, and hopefully you've used these days off productively.